Domo arigato, geek to me radio, da 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 da. Domo arigato, geek to me radio, da 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 da.
Welcome, geeks and nerds, girls and boys, to a brand new edition of Geek to Me Radio, episode 230. Today we're joined by legendary voice actor Neil Ross, talking all about his many memorable roles from Voltron to G.I. Joe and more. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of voice acting from one of the best. Stand by.
We're talking TV, comics and movies, and video games. And if you don't know Star Trek from Star Wars, we'll try to explain. There are 12 doctors, 4 Hogwarts houses, 1 ring rules them all. To be the greatest Pokemon master, you must catch them all. You must catch them all. Try to catch them all. Gotta catch them all. Gotta catch them all.
And for those of you finding us for the very first time, welcome to Geek to Me Radio. My name's James Enstall. I host this program every week, twice a week actually. We have an online show that you're listening to right now, and we also do a live radio show on the Big 550 KTRS radio station based in St. Louis, which you can also hear all of those episodes along with these online ones at geektomeradio.com. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're getting your podcast from so you get both episodes each week. We'd also appreciate it if you would check us out on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com, search for Geek to Me Radio, hit that subscribe button there. We're on the road to getting 1,000 followers as one of our goals for 2021. We'd appreciate it if you would help us make that happen. Without further ado, we've got a jam-packed show, a lot to hear from Neil Ross. Let's get into it. Right now we're talking to a legend when it comes to voice work. Nearly 300 credits on his IMDb page. All the stuff he's done, the voices of our childhood, and currently doing video games like nobody's business. Neil Ross, how are you?
I'm good, James. How about yourself?
Doing well. Thanks for the time today. It's always exciting to talk to somebody who basically is responsible for a large part of my childhood, and then I'll still hear, like, I turn on an Xbox One game, and, well, that's Neil Ross in the credits. It's amazing that your career has just spanned decades. That's got to be very rewarding for you as someone that is constantly able to get work on such great projects.
Yeah, it's really been a wonderful ride. I started out as a radio disc jockey, and I began to wonder, for a long time, I didn't even know that the voiceover business existed. It was such a well-kept secret in those days. And then when I finally found out that it did exist, I wondered if I could be a part of it. And some folks suggested that was kind of a dumb idea, but I persisted, and it worked out in the end. So, yes, it's extremely rewarding, especially when people remember things. You know,
absolutely.
They reference a show that I did 30 years ago, and they remember it, and that's very gratifying. It's wonderful. But it's just, as I said, it's been a wonderful ride, and it's funny it's very kind of you to describe me as a legend. It's a very weird thing to hear, because I try to maintain this beginner attitude in my mind. I don't ever want to turn into one of these guys who says, I'm the old pro. I've got this all figured out. Because usually that's the beginning of the end. You have to constantly keep reinventing yourself if you want to stay in this business. And so as I say, it's very kind of you to call me a legend, but I don't sit around here thinking that I'm a legend. Trust me.
And it's fascinating, too, because you just mentioned that one of my favorite writers, J.M. DeMatteis, he said that he goes by the Buddhist concept of the beginner's mind, that every project you come on, every experience you encounter in life, always look at it with that wonder of a child, like you've never done this before. And that's, I think, the secret to probably a lot of people's success.
I think so. As I said, the minute you start, I mentioned this in my book, which we'll get around to. But and I neglected to ask before we started to record this what your profanity policy is.
Usually I try to keep it that the FCC won't be upset, but I can always bleep and edit stuff. So if the mood hits you to drop an F-bomb, feel free.
Not a problem. I'm an old radio cat, so
Right.
I know all about the FCC and what they do and what they like and what they don't like. Well, I'll just shorten it to BS. One of the first mentors I had in the radio business, a lovely guy, said something to me once, and I never forgot it. He said, "One thing, kid, this doesn't mean anything now, but lock this away. One day it will." He said, "The day you start believing your own BS, that's the beginning of the end." And he was right. And yes, you're right. The Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, and also going into a recording session not with the attitude of it's an antagonistic, well, they're going to try to direct me, I hate that. Instead, going in with, how can I serve you? How can I serve? Because in the end, that's what you want to do. You want to give the buyer what he or she wants.
Right.
And you need to sort of shut your ego off as you come in through the parking lot and just try to think that you're there to serve, and hopefully you serve up something they like.
And you've worked with so many directors on these projects, and we've had Andrea Romano on the show before, and you've obviously worked with her because you did Batman the Animated Series and Animaniacs and all the different styles of people who've directed you. Do you respond better to someone who gives you kind of a structure, or do you prefer just kind of like the we brought you in because you know what you're doing, go ahead and do it?
Oh gosh, what do I prefer? A couple of times, I mean, actors sometimes badmouth directors, and a couple of times in my career, somebody's asked me to direct something, and I suddenly realized what a tough job it is. So really, I'm open for anything as long as it serves the project. If they feel they need to share a lot of information with me, fine, I'll gobble it all up. If they just throw the script in my lap and say go, I'll try that. I did a series that's kind of been forgotten. It was about a character named O.G. Reedmore, and they were very clever scripts. It was a lovely show. But there was absolutely no rehearsal. It was astonishing. We'd show up, they'd hand us the scripts, and we'd record right there. And I mean, the show was as big a shock to me as it was to the audience, because I didn't know what was going to happen next. And somehow it just turned out fine, and nobody gave us any direction at all. Of course, the thing was filled with solid prose. And me. I was fairly new at that point, but somehow I managed to stumble through it. And so, long-winded answer, but whatever the director wants to do, I'm up for.
And talk about the pros you've worked with. We've had several of your contemporaries on the show. We've had Arthur Burghardt. We've had Mary McDonnell Lewis, Michael Bell, people from your G.I. Joe and Transformers days. And it's amazing when you look back. We just talked to John Machida Jr. about Transformers the movie. And the sheer talent on a project like that. You've got Michael Bell, you've got Peter Cullen, they brought in Leonard Nimoy and Orson Welles. That had to be quite a project to be able to work on, that just this groundbreaking for the time animation direct film that was going into the theater based on this toy series.
Yes, well, of course, we did not meet Leonard Nimoy, at least I didn't, or Orson Welles. I believe they came in and worked solo. The only, stars I got involved with were Judd Nelson and Lionel Stander. Worked with those people, and I'm not sure if you even remember Lionel Stander. I do. Yeah, he was fantastic. He was a guy. He was older than Orson Welles when we did that movie, and he went all the way back. He'd appeared in a silent movie when he was a teen. Yeah, and he had this name, Lionel Stander, which sounds like it should belong to a very cultured British fellow.
But actually, he was from the Bronx, and he sounded more or less like this.
And he was just a wonderful character actor, and he told us some wonderful stories. It was fun working with him, but never got to meet Orson Welles, unfortunately.
And like I said, you've got all these projects on your belt. I love the fact that little things as I'm going over your IMDb profile, and I'm like, oh yeah, you were in that. But then I think about it. You started out with Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends doing Norman Osborn, and then you ended up in the kind of the reboot in 1990s doing Norman Osborn again. That was kind of an interesting, almost full circle. You're back with Spider-Man again. Were there any... Did they approach you because you'd done the role previously? Was that a piece you had to audition for? How did you get that role again?
No, absolutely had to read for it. I don't think they were even aware that I'd been involved, and I certainly wasn't about to tell them, because sometimes there's a reluctance to use the same actor over again. It's like, this is a new version of this. We want new people. And so I just... and also the great part was that I got to do the Green Goblin on that go-around in the 90s show, which I did not get to do in the earlier incarnation. And it was a long, it was like 15, 16 years later when that came along. I barely remembered doing Norman Osborn at that point, but no, they were not aware of it.
Yeah, that the original Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, I've talked to Dan Gilvezan, and I said, you're still the voice I hear when I read a Spider-Man comic for Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And you must get that a lot, because all the toys/comic book lines that were based off of or included characters you did, like Transformers, G.I. Joe, Centurions and Humanoids, Voltron, you've got to still be that voice in the head when people are reading these comic books and they're reading the voice of Pidge or Keith, or they're reading the voice of Wasp-X from Sectors in the comic books and stuff.
You know, I never thought about that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm sure that is the case. I don't know. Just as, well, I grew up, listening to the tail end of the golden age of radio. And so, to me, Matt Dillon, not James Arness. It was a wonderful radio actor named William Conrad. That was the voice of Matt Dillon for me. But unfortunately, he was a little too corpulent to play the Marsh. Although he did get a television show later. He was in a show called Cannon, and then a show called Jake and the Fat Man. He obviously played the Fat Man.
Yes, I remember that show.
Yeah. Well, Conrad was a prolific radio actor with this great voice. And as I say, he was always my Matt Dillon. No offense to James Arness, but...
And having grown up, like you said, listening to the radio, you kind of had that, and then you got into radio and were doing it yourself. Was there ever in the back of your mind, obviously before you got into actually doing the voice work and kind of looked into, hey, how do I get this done? Was that ever, as a little kid, I'm going to voice some characters when I grew up? Is that kind of ever where your mind went as a child?
We're going to take our first commercial break. Come back and chat more with Neil Ross this hour. Please stand by.
Hey kids, are your parents about to buy you a shiny new toy from Amazon?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Well, don't be selfish. Share some of that money with us. Before going on Amazon, make sure to type in bit.ly/geek2me in the web browser. It will look just like Amazon.com, except it'll say referral Geek to Me Radio up top. And then when you check out, a tiny percentage will go to support the show without costing you 1 cent more. So before your parents get you that gizmo, gadget, or widget, make sure they type in bit.ly/geek2me in the web browser.
bit.ly/geek2me, bit.ly/geek2me.
Yo, Joe!
Hi, this is Mary McDonald Lewis, and I was the voice of Lady J on G.I. Joe.
Hi, this is Bill Ratner. I'm the voice of Flint on G.I. Joe, and listening to Geek to Me Radio
is half the battle.
G.I. Joe against Cobra, the enemy, fighting to save the day.
Welcome back to episode 230 of Geek to Me Radio. Talking for the rest of this hour with Neil Ross, a voice actor extraordinaire. And before we took that last break, we'd asked him if he had any idea early on that he would want to be a voice actor.
No, as I say in the book, it was a thing that happened spontaneously, organically. I had no control over it. We did not have a television set for a long time. And so most of my media growing up was either the radio or this little record player that I had. And I would tune around the radio listening. Music at that point bored me. I didn't hear anything I liked very much. And so I would tune around listening for voices. People, discussing things, even if I didn't understand the topic. I was just fascinated by all the different voices that you would hear. The high ones, the low ones, people with an accent. And I began spontaneously to reproduce or try to reproduce what I heard. And there was no thought of turning this into any sort of a profession. It was almost like a compulsion. And, as I say, some kids build model planes. I sat in my room and did voices. But again, there was no thought of, this will become my life's work. It was just fun to do. And as I said, almost a compulsion. My dad in particular thought he had this weird son who sat in his room and talked to himself. Well, Dad, I turned it into a gig. What can I do?
Nowadays, no parent will blink an eye at a kid doing that. But I assume it was a little bit different back when you were growing up.
Yes. And he was not very conducive to any of that sort of thing. He wanted me to sit around and do math, which I was horrible at, and he was good at. So.
Yes, math is not my thing either. I think it's that left-right brain. Like, obviously, look at what you've been doing. That's a very right brain creative thing, where left brain, I'm not a left brain person at all.
Yeah. It's those who are, thank goodness, we need them. I have a wonderful CPA, and bless her heart, she loves to fool around with these numbers, and more power to her. I'm basically, I could add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and that's about it. And usually I use a calculator.
And you kind of mentioned a couple times the book. It's fairly new. Am I correct?
Well, you're actually part of the world's longest book tour.
Oh, great.
And it's been out for almost 2 years now, but I keep plugging along. The book is called Vocal Recall. The subtitle is A Life in Radio and Voiceovers, which pretty much tells the tale. It's my life, how I got where I ended up. Not a lot on the personal side, because frankly, it's not that interesting. But, if you have any interest in what it was like to be a swinging top 40 DJ in the heyday of the 60s and 70s, the AM top 40 radio stations, I was kind of in the thick of that. And then if you're interested in what happened in the voiceover industry beginning in the early 80s right up to the present time, well, I was at ground zero for that stuff. And I talk about what it was like to work on, as you mentioned, Voltron and G.I. Joe and Transformers and Spider-Man and all these, and the games. Well, that's a bit of a cheat. The game chapter leaves a lot to be desired, and we can discuss that if you want. But it's just the whole sweep of my career. I was lucky enough to be the announcer on the Academy Awards one year, so I devote a chapter to telling you what it's like to ride that roller coaster. And, so it's Vocal Recall by Neil Ross, Neil Ross. And to find out more, you could go to www.neilbook.com, neilbook.com. The book is available on Amazon. It's available on Audible. You shouldn't have any trouble tracking it down.
Now, we'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes, too. So if you're listening to this right now online, go ahead and go to the show notes and click the link, and you can grab Neil Ross's book. 2 years, that's still, in my opinion, a new book.
Yeah. I don't know when when it starts to become an old book, but, I didn't write this book to make money. And so far, my plan is working perfectly. But, I would like people to read it. I think, as I say, if you're interested in any of those topics and eras, you will enjoy it.
And have you found with quarantine, obviously this pandemic that hit us in 2020 and continues on a little bit now, hopefully we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Have you noticed the downloads or the book have gone up? Because I know a lot of people, that's what they're doing is like, I'm stuck at home. I'm going to listen to an audiobook, or I'm going to get some books and do some reading during this time. Have you noticed any rise in that at all?
Seems like the audiobook is popping along pretty nicely.
Good.
Of late. Yeah. Now, I got to tell you, this is the only book I've ever narrated. And I was lucky enough to win the audition to narrate. Thousands of people applied. Luckily, I won. But anyway, I think it's probably going to be the first and the last book I ever do. My hat's off to folks who do that work. That is so hard. And this is my stuff I'm reading, right? And I almost quit twice and fired myself 3 times.
Was it just the process just tedious, or was it what was the biggest hurdles with it for you?
Well, it's a long book, and the only long form stuff I've done are narrations, and you're in the studio a couple of hours maybe, and that takes care of that. But I mean, this book, it was just hours and hours and hours of sitting there reading, and I guess you got to work up the stamina to do that. I just, as I say, I would really think twice and thrice if somebody approached me about narrating a book.
And obviously, it came out 2 years ago. Obviously, there was the build-up, the writing of it. Where did the seed for the idea of, hey, I'm going to write a book about this, where did that spring from? Is it someone suggested that you should write a book? Was it something that's kind of always been in the back of your mind, recently that, hey, I should probably put all this down? What was the genesis?
Well, in the first place, I never thought I was capable of writing a book. The only reason this book got written was somebody invented word processing. Because I'm a rotten typist, and I a million times I wanted to write stuff, and I'd look at this typewriter and go, this is not going to work. I'll get 3 sentences in and make all these mistakes, and it's so hard to correct it. And, writing by longhand, some people do, but I just couldn't imagine it. And then now came the wonderful word processor where you can make mistakes and correct them real easy. And so I started to write a little bit. But the genesis for this was, there's a wonderful voice actor, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Rob Paulsen.
Oh, of course.
Probably best known for Animaniacs and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, although he's done many, many, many other things. Anyway, he has a podcast which he calls Talkin' Tunes, and occasionally he takes it on the road, and he invited me and several other people to come to the Improv in Hollywood, a venerated comedy venue, and do an evening of talking about Transformers. And I was initially reluctant. I thought, what am I going to do on stage at a comedy club? I'm not a stand-up comedian, but I screwed my courage to the sticking post, as the bard says, and I showed up, and I had a wonderful time. The audience was filled with Transformers fans, and we had a million laughs, and I started thinking, what if I wrote a monologue and I could book myself into places and do the monologue and then take questions from the audience? So I start writing this monologue, and at a certain point I realized this is either the world's longest monologue or it's something else, and I don't really have the courage to say book yet. So I started playing a game with myself. I'm just writing this chapter. If nothing else happens after that, no big deal. And then I would get an idea for another chapter and another and another. The whole thing took about a year because I'm not very disciplined. But at a certain point, I realized, buddy, if you keep going, you have a book. And that's what happened. And I just fell into it.
And again, we're going to put that link to the book in the show notes if anyone wants to buy it. And I highly suggest that you do. We've had Rob Paulsen on the show a couple times. It's almost like voice acting is experiencing kind of like, I don't want to say a resurgence, I don't want to say a golden age, but there is this newfound level, because you see it at these comic conventions, they'll have people who are in these TV shows like Walking Dead, and the lines for voice actors like yourself, like for Arthur Burkhart, for Rob Paulsen, are just as long as the lines for the people from like The Walking Dead and things like that, Vampire Diaries, which is, I think, phenomenal that so many people are connecting with the voice actors on a level that you couldn't have done before social media and things like that. It's amazing.
We'll take our next commercial break, come back and continue talking with Neil Ross. Please stand by.
Come on in, come to the place where fun never ends. Come on in, it's time to party with Garfield and friends. Come on in, it's time to party with Garfield and friends.
Hey, you guys, this is Raphael of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And after we've kicked Shredder's butt, we all get down the sewer and we listen to Geek to Me Radio. Turtle Power!
Welcome back to Geek to Me Radio. This is our online show. We also have a live radio show. None of this would be possible without the help and support of our premier sponsor, and that sponsor is the City of St. Charles, the Greater St. Charles Convention and Visitors Bureau. The website to go see all that they do is discoverstcharles.com. Lots of places have these historic districts that they'll have, that are special. They've got, the town's history and everything like that. Basically, every city's got the old part of the city. Well, St. Charles is in a very old foundation. It's one of the oldest towns founded west of the Mississippi, and they just celebrated their 250th anniversary a couple of years ago, and there's a lot to see, a lot to do. It's one of those great little cultural areas, but also it's alive. It's really hard to describe unless you've seen it, so I can't recommend highly enough coming to see it. If you're in the greater St. Louis area and you've not yet visited St. Charles, maybe you're new to the area, maybe this is the first time you're hearing of it, be sure to check it out. You can go to the website Discover St. Charles, that's discoverstcharles.com, to kind of see what there is to do. There's a lot of stuff happening all the time, big festivals that go on several times throughout the year. They just had a great music festival going on this past Sunday for Memorial Day weekend, and there's, like I said, literally always something going on if you check out the website, or if you just happen out there, you'll probably run into, oh, look what's happening. This is cool. They'll have a food truck station set up all along the Frontier Park. Sometimes they'll do those events. There's ice sculptures in the winter. Obviously, Christmas Traditions is a great one. Legends and Lanterns, another great festival. If you're from outside the area, now that restrictions are being lifted and we're starting to see more travel, I just heard a news report that said air travel is drastically up because people are wanting to get out and do stuff. So come visit St. Charles. Come on out. Check out the website again to plan your trip. See what there is to do. Kind of make a to-do list of all the things you want to get done while you're there, things you want to see, places you want to eat, and there are a lot of good places to eat. Go all to the website to get the information. That's discoverstcharles.com, discoverstcharles.com for an historically good time. Before we took that last break, we were chatting with voice actor Neil Ross, just a legend in the field. So many different credits. I grew up with this guy voicing so many different projects, and he's still at it. And I asked him about how social media and the way the internet has been kind of bringing to life the things you can find on these certain voice actors and conventions, how social media has kind of created a resurgence of love for voice actors.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely amazing and a gift. One of the questions we always get is, when you were doing G.I. Joe or Transformers, did you ever think in a million years that the people would even remember them 30 years later? And my answer is always no. We had no clue. In the days when we did these, the current wisdom of the industry was, you do a show and the kids who watch it age out and they're not interested in animation anymore. The show goes off the air and is more or less instantly forgotten. And they're creating new shows for the new crop of 13 to 15-year-olds or whatever the target audience was. And we just assumed all of this stuff would end up on a shelf somewhere and be forgotten. But obviously, as you point out, that's not what happened. And you have this wonderful gift of these marvelous fans who show up and are thrilled to meet you and remember and I've got old buddies who were just radio guys, disc jockeys, and eventually retired. And they're every bit as talented as I am, but it's like nobody remembers anything they did. They were writing on water.
Yeah.
There may be a few air checks of them floating around that other old radio guys listen to, but basically it's gone. They have no equivalent of a G.I. Joe or a Transformers the way us voiceover people do. So, yeah, I mean, I never could have predicted it, and it's just a wonderful surprise. The the first people would tell me I needed to go to conventions, and I had this image of me sitting at a card table in a hall being ignored. So I resisted. And finally, I did. The first one I did was a BotCon in Pasadena, I think in 2011. And I thought, if it turns out to be a bummer, it's, I live in the LA area, so all I got to do is give them their money back, get in my car, and drive home. Well, my God, they said, it's time for you and Greg Berger to sign autographs. And we walk out from behind this curtain, and there's this line of people that extends to the horizon. And we're saying, who are they for? And they said, they're for you. And I almost started to cry. I couldn't believe it. And this pouring of people, some of them in tears, shaking my hand. I've traveled thousands of miles to meet you. I was just absolutely astonished. I had no idea that this kind of thing existed. Of course, since then, I've done a ton of conventions, and I always have a great time. Unfortunately, we can't do them now, but...
Hopefully, because that's one of the things I've missed so much. I did one convention in February in L.A., right before the pandemic kicked in and all the lockdowns started. But I tell you, that's one of the things I have missed more than anything else is going, because they do these virtual conventions. I think you've done a couple probably.
I've done one.
Yeah.
I've done one.
But it's not the same thing, because I usually bring, because I'm a collector, like I said, I'm an 80s kid, and this is kind of what I do. I love having people like you who I can talk with and share their experience and everything. And I was looking over your IMDb resume, and I said, boy, if I ever do end up meeting Neil Ross, I'm going to probably have to give him $500 to sign all this stuff. When you think of the Centurions, Ace McCloud, your Herc Armstrong in Inhumanoids, Waspback and Sectors, Springer and Voltron, Shipwreck and G.I. Joe, all the toys that were based off of you. Do you keep any of those? Did the studios give you any? Do you have any of the toys of the characters you voiced?
No, we were completely cut off from that part of the business. That was just sort of we knew that there were these action figures, but no, nobody gave us any. There's one funny story that I mentioned in the book. One of the, I honestly can't remember which one it was, but it was one of the women in the show. And she hadn't been in the show for a while. And then she got called to come in and work, and she showed up. And one of the producers is sort of wandering around, and he says, "Hey, how you doing?" And she said, "Fine, how are you?" He said, "We haven't seen you in a while." She said, "Well, I haven't been in the show for a while." And he said, "Oh, that's because your doll's not selling."
Oh, my gosh.
And he walked out and left, and she told us the story, and she said, "Do you think he was serious?" And that started the joke among us. If you're not being booked, run down to Toys R Us and buy a couple dozen of your action figure. They'll put you back in the show. But no, we were completely cut off from that, and it never occurred to me to go out and buy one. Over the years, some kind fans have gifted me with a few of these, which I have. But no, that was just a completely separate part of the business. We didn't have any contact with it.
And again, I don't want to strictly focus on the work you did on these particular shows, but I was looking again. You've got from 1986, you were doing Voltron, Fleet of Doom, Gem of the Hologram, Centurions, Inhumanoids, Rambo, Sectors, Transformers, carrying over into Visionaries in late 86. When did you sleep? I mean, to do those shows, it wasn't like the technology now where you can do it from your home. You had to go to the studio, I'm imagining. So how did you have time to do 7 series?
And here it is again, time for another break. We're going to take this one and be right back, so don't go anywhere.
Up on the mesa, high above the clouds, there's a world apart from all the rest. On the mesa, live the real cowboy.
Hey, hi, listeners. This is Greg Berger. Meet Grimlock, Dinobot leader from Transformers. And guess what? You're listening to Geek to Me Radio.
Welcome back to Geek to Me Radio. Chatting for this hour with Neil Ross, and I'll let you in on a secret right now. This is part 1. I had so much fun talking with Neil, and there was so much information and so many topics to cover that I could not fit all this into one episode. So there is going to be a Neil Ross interview part 2. So if you're listening to this right now, sit back and relax, enjoy this, and just kind of soak it all in. And then when you're done, you can catch episode 232 because my online shows are even numbered ones, and you'll be able to hear the rest of Neil's interview. It's a great conversation with just a great guy. And before we took this last break, we were chatting about all these different projects he'd worked on in the mid to late 80s. And at one time, he was working on 7 different series at one time.
Yeah, it is kind of astonishing. Well, usually they only work, the fastest they go is like once a week. Although I think Voltron, we may have done 2 sessions a week. But somehow, we haven't talked about voiceover agents, but there's a point where, if you're lucky, your voiceover agent is no longer trying to get you work. They're just trying to schedule you so you don't miss out on anything.
Yeah.
And they're juggling sessions. And so the way that was able to happen was the wonderful agents that I have who would sit there and figure out some way to get me to these various sessions without a problem. And most of the time it worked out. Once in a while, if you're already booked, they say, all right, well, we'll have to bring him in for a pickup session, meaning you show up alone and you do your lines in the clear out of any kind of context, which is not a way I like to work, but sometimes we had to do it that way.
Yeah. And you've got, like I said, a lot of the video games. I know we've talked to voiceover actors who they do the video games, but they say they aren't as much. It's not that they aren't as much fun, but it's a much different job doing voice for video games than it is for a cartoon series. And you've done a lot of both. Have you found that to be a similar experience for you, or do you not have a preference one way or the other?
No, games are very different. I mean, you're using a lot of the same muscles, but I'm trying to think of a good analogy and I can't. But, when you do an animated show, well, you have a storyline, you have a plot, and you're a character in that plot. And so, to me anyway, it's fairly easy to figure out how to read the lines. You just you just look at the context of the scene you're in, and you know the plot, and you react as you would if it was real. And also you're working with other actors, which is wonderful. I mean, it's the back and forth between actors that really puts the spice in everything. Because another actor's feeding you a line that you have to react to, and you think you know how he's going to deliver the line, but then he throws you a curve and delivers it in a different way, which of course influences you to say your line in a way you hadn't planned on saying, but sometimes it works out much better. But none of that exists with games. You work alone, at least I always have. Maybe they do multiple sessions under certain circumstances, but I've always worked alone. And you're doing these lines with no context, with no plot line. Sometimes I'll get a line and I'll say to the person directing, "What's happening here?" And they'll say, "Honestly, I don't know." And you just have to guess. Because, of course, the plot is being determined by the player. And that will all happen months or years later when the game is finally released. And so, as I say, you're doing these lines out of context without even a storyline. And the only analogy I can come up with, it's like an actor who, instead of having this beautiful set constructed for the show, is just told to stand in front of a green screen and is told, well, we'll put the castle and the monster in later. You just pretend it's there. I'm sure that's a lot tougher than if somebody's built a set.
Right.
Because I've read, face actors who say, a lot of the time, if the set is really beautifully constructed, it helps them get into character and feel like they really are in the 17th century or whatever is going on,
And with these video games, you've voiced in several different games, certainly Masters of Terras Kasi, Rogue Squadron, and Rebellion. You voiced Han Solo. And you've also, again, in your cartoons, you voiced John Rambo. So what was it like taking on, these people think of these Hollywood legends. You think of Harrison Ford and Sylvester Stallone. What was it like voicing Han Solo and John Rambo? Was there any nerves? Did you try to emulate how they sound, or were you kind of just, no, do it in your own way?
Well, as far as the Star Wars stuff, nobody ever said the name Harrison Ford to me.
Okay.
And I just came in and more or less did a somewhat masculine version of me. And maybe they thought that it just sounded like him, but nobody ever said, try to sound like him, or we think you sound like him. It was just another day at the office, shall we say. In the case of Rambo, and this is another story I tell in the book, they called me in, and the first thing they said is, we do not want a Sylvester Stallone sound-alike.
Okay.
I said, okay, got it. And then to make them laugh, I began to do the audition and this kind of thing here, and they said, we love that. And I said, I thought you didn't want a Sylvester Stallone sound-alike. And they said, that doesn't sound like Sylvester Stallone. I said, you're absolutely right, it doesn't. I'm no fool. And that's what I did for the next 65 episodes. And as I say in the book, it's one of a number of occasions where a lousy impression got me a job. The impression was so awful that they thought it was something different. And they liked it. So
those happy accidents that happen.
Yeah.
So when did you kind of gather? Because obviously you continue to work on some fantastic projects. You've been tied with Marvel for a lot. You've had obviously we talked about Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, then the Spider-Man series that came out in '94, Iron Man and Fantastic Four. You actually got to voice Doctor Doom and the Super Skrull. With all these characters, obviously also Pryde of the X-Men, which I still have the VHS copy of. I'm going to have you sign that too when I meet you. You voiced Nightcrawler. So you got to work with these Marvel properties. That's exciting to have so many of those under your belt.
Yeah, I don't think I realized it at the time, They were just shows, and I really wasn't focusing on who was producing them. But you're absolutely right. And that X-Men, it's so amazing. That was the pilot for that show, Pryde of the X-Men. Mm-hmm. And they decided not to go with a series. So all that exists is that one pilot that we did with Wally. And it's amazing the number of people who reference it and want to talk about it, to the point that I'm thinking they made a huge, huge mistake not doing the series. I think they were teed up for a big hit.
Absolutely. In fact, we had Eric and Julia Lewald on the show, who were the showrunners for X-Men the Animated Series that came out in the early 90s. And they said that pilot was kind of what they kind of pitched when they went back in to pitch the new series that they ended up making, X-Men the Animated Series, that was a huge foundational block for them. And it's amazing to me, too, the voices. I'm talking to you right now, and then the voice you find for Pidge in Voltron versus the voice you did for Clyde in Pac-Man versus the voices you did for Han Solo or in Savage Dragon or The Mask. Where do you personally find the voice for these characters? Is it kind of like the director says, here's what we want, and you kind of riff off of that? Or do you have, like, when you see the drawings for the characters, you kind of in your mind hear what they should sound like? How do you find the voice for all these different characters that sound so vastly different?
We're going to pause again, take our last commercial break, come back and continue our chat with Neil Ross right after this.
This is Arthur Burkhart, an actor from your past, and you're listening to a great show, Geek to Me Radio. Stay tuned.
And we're back for our final segment. I want to make sure we mention our official movie sponsor, Marcus Theaters. Marcus Theaters and Movie Tavern. Boy, I missed movies. I don't know about you, but during this pandemic, it's just one of those things where when something like that is taken away from you, you instantly feel it. And seeing movies as they were meant to be seen on the big screen, can you imagine if Avatar had been released just for home viewing on a streaming service, it would not be near the level it is today as far as, box office revenue, surely, but just the status of it, because that's one of those ones with that immersive experience you need to see on a big screen in IMAX or in 3D. A lot of movies I've seen, and not necessarily in those settings, but some movies are just meant to be seen. Avengers Endgame is one I always talk about, because there's that moment when you're in a packed theater and the hammer flies into Cap's hand just as he thinks everything's, about done. And, Thanos is about to crush Thor, and the hammer hits Cap's hand, and the whole theater just roared, so excited. And that's not an experience you can recreate at home. The movie theaters are a great, great environment for that reason, among many others. But if you want to see a movie in the best possible surroundings, Marcus Theaters and Movie Tavern have you covered. We just saw A Quiet Place Part 2. These are the way movies are meant to be seen in theaters, and the best place to see them. Honestly, I've been to many other theaters. Marcus Theaters and Movie Tavern have it down. They know what they're doing. A great environment, always clean. If you're feeling a little unsteady because of COVID, they're still requiring masks, as long as you're not sitting in your seat eating and drinking. But you can download the Marcus Theaters app, so the concessions are hot and ready and waiting for you when you get there for whatever movie showtime you picked out. Go to the website, marcustheaters.com, find the Marcus or Movie Tavern closest to you, get your tickets online, see movie reviews, go see Cruella. That's another one I can't recommend highly enough. You need to get out and see these in a theater in a proper setting. Marcus Theaters and Movie Tavern is the best way to do that. MarcusTheaters.com for the best movie-going experience in the galaxy. Wrapping up our conversation today with Neil Ross, because part 2 is coming, and we talked about this last question before we're going to cut it off here, how he was able to find the voice for so many different characters.
Well, it's, I'm assuming other people in the voiceover business work this way, although you would have to ask them. I've never really discussed it with anybody, but this is all auditions, and you just have an appointment time, and you show up. I try to show up 15 minutes to a half an hour early so I can think about it. And there on the bulletin board or wherever is a drawing, maybe 2 drawings, profile and head on, and then there's a 2 or 3 paragraph description of the character. And you absorb all of this, and if all goes well, I mostly go off the visual. I look at the face and the body, and if all goes well, I begin to hear a voice in my head. And then the trick is to get that out of Mr. Mouth when you go in to actually do the audition. And sometimes they let it go at that. Sometimes they ask you to come up with 2 or 3 alternatives. In some cases, they go, I kind of like where you are, but I want you to do a little more of this and a little less of that. Sometimes the ultimate voice is the result of the collaboration between the person doing the audition and you. You end up with some kind of a compromise. In the case of Pidge, and again, I mentioned this in the book, I was quite new to the business when I got the Voltron job. That was actually the first lead role I ever got. And I was very nervous, that somebody was going to say, this isn't an actor, this is some ex-disc jockey. Get him out of here. And so I knew I was going to be doing Keith, but I had no idea. Suddenly, at the session, the director shoves this drawing under my nose, which looks like an elf with glasses. And he says, what do you got for this guy? And in a blind...
Well, guys, I run into this voice up in here, and
he said, that's fine, that's perfect. And I thought, well, dodged that bullet. And I thought, well, this character will only be in 1 episode. It turned out, of course, he was a part of the ensemble, and he was in every episode. And
just how long I'm stuck with this voice.
And one time, this never made any sense to me, but he said, the people back at the office who edit this stuff, they're all convinced they could do this voice better than you. And I said, well, but I'm the prototype. How do you do it better? I don't understand this. He says, don't worry about it. You got the job. But, that the voice of Pidge was decided in about 90 seconds.
That's going to do it. My thanks once again to Neil Ross. Make sure you mark this page. Make sure you come back. Make sure you subscribe so that in a week or so, when the next episode of Neil Ross Part 2 drops, you've got a notification that, hey, it's ready, and I can go on and continue this interview, which I love talking to voice actors, and Neil Ross was just such a wonderful man to talk to, so needed to make it into 2 parts. Thanks, as always, to Joey V, who makes this show sound as good as it does. I know he knows that I would not be able to do any of this without him. Thanks again to our sponsors, the City of St. Charles and Marcus Theaters, and until next week, my friends.
It's not in the way you watch I zombie. It's not in the way you watch The Flash. It's not in the way you love Scotty Young Art. It's not in the way you play Mario Kart. It's not in the way you look when you make Game of Thrones references. That's our show. This is Geek to Me Radio. That's our show. This is Geek to Me Radio.
Thank you, Cobra Island. Good night.